Coming down in 3, 2, and 1. Welcome to everybody to our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider podcast for this week. Week 8 in the NFL as the Chicago Bears get ready to take on the San Francisco 49ers on Halloween at Soldier Field. It's probably appropriate. It'll be Halloween. There's all kinds of punchlines and taglines in there. We can't wait to see what the costumes are, particularly the costumes the players show up in, because that's been an issue the last few weeks. But first, let me introduce all. I am Hub Arkush, and I'm joined, as I am every week, by our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider beat reporter, Sean Hammond, and our Shaw Media Group Sports editor, Kyle Nabors. And, guys, we want to remind everybody we appreciate you being with us for these podcasts. If you're listening to us now, thank you so much. But there is the opportunity to participate in these podcasts, to join us live. We record Friday mornings at 9:30 Chicago time. And if you go to any of our Twitter handles, I am at Hub_Arkush, Sean is at Sean_Hammond, Kyle is at Kyle Nabors. You can find the connection to join the podcast live via StreamYard. You get the video along with it. You can ask questions. We can find out what's on your mind and try and answer you all. So please join us when you can. If not, we hope that you enjoy listening to not only ours, but other Bears fans' thoughts as we put together this interactive podcast. And with that, we'll get going today. And guys, as painful as it may be, we've got to at least acknowledge what happened last Sunday. And, listen, we'll talk a little bit about all of it. But at the end of the day, as we build forward, teams have these happen, okay? The Bears are in trouble. They've got a world of issues right now. I don't know if they're going to turn them around or not. But Kyle, they're still obviously not as bad as they were last Sunday. That snowball got rolling downhill. I actually noticed I did a column and a piece got edited, and this is not a complaint to my editor because this stuff has to be edited. But what got cut out was one of the points I made was that 5 of the Bucs' 6 scoring drives all started on the Bears side of the football field, and 4 of those 5 started from the 40-yard line or in. So it's going to make your defense look a lot worse than it is. But the defense wasn't good enough, and the offense gave a Cleveland train wreck type performance.
You can't put most of that on the defense. Can you guys hear me echoing, by the way? I don't know.
It's not terrible.
I think it just stopped, Kyle.
It just stopped. That was odd. Okay. No, I mean, you can't put most of that on the defense. When you're giving NFL offenses, particularly one led by Tom Brady, short fields, they're going to put the ball in the end zone. My thing was, I mean, if you listened to or if you've listened to this podcast in the past, after the Cleveland game, I think it might have been going into the Packers game, I said that I think all of us agreed that you didn't expect more performances like you had in that Cleveland game. You figured they'd get things corrected to make sure that didn't happen again. And they were still kind of a mediocre, stuck in the middle team, in my estimation. I expected games like where you saw with Green Bay, where they were in the game, but they weren't in the game. I didn't expect another Cleveland type game. And after seeing that, I do think you have to reassess the potential for this team to get back on track a little closer than I originally gave it credit for.
Yeah, Sean, I don't know if I agree with Kyle's point about in the game, but not in the game against the Packers. We can get to that if we want, but the Packers are always a sore subject. But relative to this one,
I mean, my thing is like until the Bears are able to score, like they're going to be in games, but not really in games is what I'm trying to say.
I hear you. That one is just kind of unfortunate because the defense played outstanding all day and they get it to 3 points with 4 minutes left in the game. And then the defense gives up that last drive to Rodgers, which shouldn't have happened the way it did. And so, different problem, different issue. At the end of the day, what matters is they lost. We know that. And Kyle, I think that's kind of, or Sean, I should say, I think that's the point that we're trying to make here. A loss is a loss, but as you evaluate a team, you analyze who they are. There's all different kinds of ways to approach how fixable some of this stuff is. And a lot of what made that so ugly in Tampa isn't going to happen again. We said that after Cleveland. This was a different kind of loss. But to another one of Kyle's points is you can only really see from the press box, Tom Brady didn't play all that well. That's the stunning part about it is they get beat 38-3. The guy throws 4 touchdown passes, but he didn't play a Tom Brady game. He missed a number of throws. The one long touchdown to Mike Evans where Jalen Johnson got beat, and he did get beat. Nobody's defending the developing young star, but he got beat by a half a step. I mean, Brady dropped a dime on that throw, and that's what makes them Super Bowl champions. So some of that stuff is going to happen, and those are the things that are fixable two ways. One, you play it tighter, but also most quarterbacks can't make that play. So you do have to consider the competition. And I think that's where you can still have hope that the defense, we believe, is a lot better than that. But it always comes back to the offense with this team and where they're at. And I thought that Justin Fields took a noticeable step backwards in Tampa.
Well, we can get into Field, Hub. I just wanted to say one thing too. You talk about fixable problems, and the number one fixable problem that stands out to me in that game is, having a right tackle who's ready to play and who can, doesn't have to come in on just a couple hours notice. I mean, that really hurt the Bears. From you talk about the field position and all that. That's part of the reason why these turnovers were happening. Justin Fields is out there on an island, and he's got a guy running at his face, all game long, or at least that first quarter, it was pretty rough. And not that Latavius Simmons, he was put in a bad position. He found out a couple hours before the game that he was going to be starting at right tackle, and that's never something you want. Obviously, that's a part of this COVID world and this COVID NFL right now. But hopefully, that's not something that happens again. Not saying that was the difference between a win and a loss. I don't think any of us picked the Bears to win this game, but certainly that was a big reason why the margin was so wide.
I completely agree. And though, guys, this is the one where we talk about what's fixable and what may not be. We have to remember, we've been reporting, most of the week that Latavius Simmons is the third string right tackle. He's actually the fourth string right tackle. He was behind Jermaine Ifedi, Larry Borum, Elijah Wilkinson, and then you get to Latavius Simmons. And you've got your backup in Elijah Wilkinson starting because Ifedi's on IR. And so now you're getting ready for the Bucs. Are you going to give first team reps to the fourth string right tackle because you think the second string right tackle might go down? Yeah, it's on the Bears, it's on Matt Nagy, it's on that staff. But that's the kind of thing, Kyle. It's right to focus on it because it was obviously a problem. Kid got benched before halftime, and Alex Bars did settle things down a little bit. And so I guess it's fair to criticize offensive line coach Juan Castillo and head coach Matt Nagy for not knowing that Alex Bars was going to be better than Latavius Simmons with no reps. By the way, at least Latavius Simmons had a couple. But man, that's the kind of tough spot you get into sometimes, that it happens to every team.
I mean, we're never going to know why, but it would be fascinating to find out the answer. They had to have the conversation, right? A Latavius Simmons or Alex Bars out there at right tackle to start the game. That happened Sunday morning. They didn't just plug in Simmons without at least having a conversation of if they had another option, right?
Well, my guess is they did have a conversation, and they said, okay, Latavius Simmons had next to no reps. Alex Bars has had none at all. Simmons has been a right tackle since the day they got to training camp.
Yeah.
Alex Bars is your jack of all trades. He's your Swiss Army knife. But
which is why I think that's probably part of the reason they went with Simmons, because Bars having the flexibility. They've used him as that sixth lineman too, right? So if you move Bars outside, then you lose your sixth lineman, and
exactly. Yeah. That's how the snowball got rolling downhill, because it's funny, I've watched that tape 4 or 5 times now, and it got out of hand so quickly. And then the change came when the score was, I believe, already 28-0, that I haven't even looked back. I got to go back and look now. How many times did they try and go to that formation with whoever Bars' backup at that position is? I don't know if they have a backup.
I don't even think they did. I don't recall one time.
I think, that's my point, Sean. I think you're right. And so that was probably the biggest. They didn't even view Bars as an option. They, going in, again, you're at your fourth string right tackle. And you don't know until a couple hours before the game. It's not like it's an in-game injury. I mean, the guy tests. You weren't planning for that. And so, yeah, it was a tough call. So, guys, this is the kind of stuff that, on one hand, it is fair for Bears Nation to be furious, to be livid. How could it be that ugly? How could you let that happen? How could Latavius Simmons be out there? But then when you start to walk these things through, there's some things that it's reasonable to, at least give red marks to or negative commentary to the coaching and the organization. But you can't plan for everything, and this kind of feels like pretty close to that to me, Sean.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you never expect guys to go down on the COVID list, and it's just kind of unfortunate. And the situation, now unfortunately for the Bears is they've been doing meetings all week virtually, and it's kind of back in that COVID protocol like they saw for much of the second half of last year. So it will be interesting to see, if at all this sort of affects the way that they're preparing for this week.
Let me before we get to that question, real quick. I want to put a cap on that, and then we'll go to the question from Marty. But we're here to talk football, talk Bears. These are podcasts, so we can get off the subject a little bit occasionally. But what we don't want to do is get it into other very deep subjects and start offering opinions that we have no expertise on. But I would say that this is kind of a weird COVID period that the league is in right now, because I just was reading last night that as of the last week across the country, positive COVID cases are down 20%. We're not hearing as much about the Delta variant anymore. We know it's still a problem. We know we're still in a pandemic, but now you've got a situation with a business enterprise in the NFL and a team with the Chicago Bears, where they have a much higher vaccination rate than the general public. They're doing all of this extreme mitigation procedures. Some of these guys who are testing positive are vaccinated, and yet now we find the Bears in an outbreak for the first time. Think about it. We went through all last year. The Bears didn't have an outbreak. You had a positive test here and there. And so you do kind of scratch your head and say, what's going on there? But that's just food for thought for everybody, because again, it's almost like the Bears are that cartoon character that's running around with the dark cloud following them everywhere, and then they come up with something like this, So unless you guys want to expand on that, then Kyle, let's get to some questions.
The only thing I'll say there is I had the thought yesterday when we had another positive case. It turned out being a staffer, but what is it? It's been 5 players and 3 coaches now, right? Or 3 staffers at least. We don't know if the staffer is technically a coach. Just interesting how everything has evolved, not just in the NFL, but really as a society. The pandemic, obviously we have vaccines, a big difference from last year, but I just feel like it would have been much more panic mode, really, across Chicagoland. If a year ago the Bears had 8 positive cases, I feel like that would be national news, and it just
right.
We'd
be talking about postponing the game.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like, I mean, that sucks, but life goes on. And it's like I said, we're in a lot different situation as a nation than we were a year ago. It's just interesting to see how things have changed.
Yeah, and just keep in mind, we're recording Friday morning, and I just got back from a dog walk, and that's where I do the only logical thinking that I do, I think, sometimes. But it occurred to me, Robert Quinn, and we're recording at 9:30 Friday morning, so depending on when you're listening to this, the things could have changed. I'm pretty sure that Quinn is vaccinated. We're not allowed to. Well, we're allowed to ask. We're not going to get answers, and it probably shouldn't be asking. I'm pretty sure that he's vaccinated. He hits the list last Friday. Most of the players that have tested, actually, I think it's fair to say this season, most of the players that have tested positive, vaccinated or not, haven't stayed on that list more than a week or so. In his case, I think he is vaccinated, but now we're sitting here 8 days later and no news yet about him coming off the list. So again, it's just puzzling how, the vaccinated folks are getting it. We know it's a possibility, but then some of these vaccinated folks also are symptomatic as opposed to asymptomatic. As near as we can tell, at least 3-4 days in visiting with Matt Nagy, he's been asymptomatic. So it's just... Guys, I think it's worth the conversation that we've had. We're going to stop it now and get back to football to point out that everything that we evaluated and tried to analyze last year, everything that is going on right now, is very much tempered by the COVID reality. This is not the NFL or professional football the way that these players and coaches have trained their whole life to work at it and participate in it. It's not the way that we've always been, trained and caused to cover it. So it's something you should keep in the back of your mind as part of the evaluation, positive or negative, as we give these guys credit or talk about moving on. So forgive me for that sermon, but I think last year nobody paid enough attention to what they were dealing with, as they couldn't wait to get in line to criticize people. It is better this year and less of an excuse, but it's still there and it's still real.
Sorry, I'm now I'm going to derail us even more because I just thinking of talking COVID. The Packers obviously last night having Devontae Adams and Alan Lazard out, still winning that game, and I don't want to talk about their COVID situation. What I do want to ask is, did you guys watch that game? And two, if you did, what the hell happened on that last play?
I did watch that. Yeah. Hub, you got any answer?
I actually have to confess, I turned it off prior to the last play. So I'd have to, go back and watch the video a few more times. But, guys, it's the never ending mystery of the Packers. You look at the team, you look at the depth chart, you look at the roster, you look at the coaching staff. It's all good, criticizing any of it. But none of it feels that good, and they do stuff like this, and so I know a lot of the conversation this morning is already more about, gee, did we jump too soon on the Cardinals? Because you wonder how this stuff happens. But that's being a Packer fan, or being a Packer, I guess, more to the point. And obviously, it's a pretty good place to be in the NFL.
Yeah, Kyle, that was a weird play to end that game. I mean, they're a miscommunication away from a Cardinals win right there.
Yeah, not very often in the red zone in a situation like that, you have a receiver hit pretty much directly in the back with the ball.
And he's just not even turning his head. Yeah, I haven't seen that in a situation like that with the game on the line.
Not a professional team, at least. But anyway, so I'm going to throw Marty's. It was more of a comment than anything, and I just put it up there because I wanted to throw a bow on that situation. They were saying they felt the 10 plays bars at tight end, six offensive linemen, even 7 sometimes, would be better than 60 from Simmons at right tackle. And what I think what we were trying to say, and just to summarize it, was the fact that it's okay to question. I mean, the Bears clearly got that wrong, right? But I don't think their process was wrong in trying to decide that. When you're talking, they had a game plan all week, assuming that they were going to continue to have, bars out there, that 6th guy go, multiple tight ends. And then you have to make that change a couple hours before the game. By moving bars, you probably rip up a lot of that game plan. So their thought was, well, throw Simmons in there, and that way we can at least try and keep the game plan intact. Obviously it didn't work, but I understand what the thought process was, at least.
Well, I'll go even a step further, Kyle. I mean, Alex Bars has not been a tackle since he got to the Chicago Bears. I mean, even prior to becoming, and they've really made him a 6th offensive lineman. He's not really playing a tight end position. They've kind of created a new position for him here. Marty, he is actually getting a lot more than 10 snaps a game, in the different ways that they're using him. But mainly to the point is Lachavious Simmons made the team as a tackle. You assume that he has the prospects and the traits and the talents to be an NFL tackle. He has worked as your backup tackle all season long. I will say again, I don't think Alex Bars, other than maybe, I think he played a little left tackle in a preseason game, as I recall. But since the season started, I can pretty much guarantee you he hasn't taken a rep at tackle. So, you can say it's a misevaluation of Lachavious Simmons, Sean. And in fairness to him, by the way, that was Shaq Barrett. That was Jason Pierre-Paul. Those were all pros doing that to him. That was not, some kid that went out there and couldn't block another second stringer. So all of that said, maybe Simmons isn't good enough and shouldn't be on the team. And I don't know if you make that judgment after a quarter and a half of disaster. But based on the decision to start him there, Sean, I'm not even sure it was a decision. I think it was automatic. I think they looked at the depth chart and they said, well, he's the last tackle we got left. They didn't put Alex Bars in because he was behind, Simmons on the depth chart. They had to do something. They put Bars out there in desperation, and at least he settled things down a little bit.
Yeah, that was the what do we do now? Let's throw Alex Bars in there because he can play anywhere. It was just a bad situation. I mean, yes, Simmons has to be ready. That's your job when you're a backup in the NFL. You hear these guys all the time say you got to prep like you're starting. But, to find out just a couple hours before the game that you're going up against these all-pro pass rushers, there were clearly some times where there were some miscommunications or the protection wasn't right. And he was not looking good out there. But it was just an overall bad situation. More than I don't have a problem either with the way that the Bears went about it. Maybe they should have pulled the trigger a little bit sooner when they saw things were going downhill fast. But I don't know. They pulled the trigger pretty fast too.
Yeah, guys, at the end of the day, I think the only point I'm trying to make is that there's reasonable analysis, and then there's stuff that happens. And right now, with where we're at, with what we saw happen against Tampa, with what's been going on with this team in the last 2 or 3 weeks, even with the way they're handling some of the other challenges now with COVID, I could probably come up with 10 to 12 different things that, when analyzed, could cost Matt Nagy his job. And the only reason I focus on Matt is if the head coach goes, then everything comes tumbling down. And maybe you could say the same thing about Ryan Pace. But when you get to a situation where you're going into a game with your first 3 tackles on IR, when you think about it, because I think Borum had even moved ahead of Wilkinson, before he sprained that ankle. And Tevin Jenkins was clearly going to be the opening day starter until he needed back surgery. And then there's Jermaine Ifedi. So basically, you've got your first 3 tackles on IR. You're starting number 4. He's had the reps all week. I don't know what else, people expect. They should have looked in their crystal ball, said, okay, we're going to find out now that Simmons is not the guy that we thought he was for the last year and a half. He's going to be a train wreck. So we've got to find a guy who doesn't play the position to start him out there instead. No, that's just not an analysis a team does. So I'm far more concerned by other things that happened in that game, Kyle, than the fact that Simmons was the starting tackle.
Yeah, I agree. It's also, you say you're far more concerned. I feel like it's tough to evaluate some of the concerns out of that game because of the breakdowns on the offensive line. I know earlier you talked about Justin Fields taking a step back, and I don't think you're wrong. I think Justin Fields had a really poor game. But for instance, like, you look at the two fumbles he lost. I mean, I think both of them ranked in the top 15 so far this year in terms of time to hit the quarterback. And that's across all NFL games. When a quarterback is getting hit at roughly, I think one of them
2.5 seconds.
I would say, yeah. I think one of them might have been under 2.5 seconds. It's hard to evaluate an overall performance when a quarterback at any age, but particularly a young quarterback is under that type of pressure.
Yeah, and guys, to be clear, when I say I think he took a step back, that's me after going back and forth over this tape, and I'm not even considering 4 of the 5 turnovers. I mean, you're right. It's not about the fumbles, okay? I think we do have to worry at some point that ball comes out of his hands a lot, even though this is happening, the rush, I'm talking about the great pressure, but that's not what I would be critical of. I mean, I don't think they were all his fault. The one interception where he escapes the pocket and then is trying to hit Allen Robinson and makes that terrible throw. He can't do that. He's got to know he can't do that. This is where it's the learning process. And immediately, you get the fans and the amateur analysts want to say, well, that's because they're coaching the running out of them and they're trying to keep him in the pocket. No, that's not what they're doing at all. And that's not what happened there. He is not making decisions. He's not making quick enough decisions. And that includes when to pull the ball down and run, and when you do pull the ball down, to commit to having the ball down.
I mean, that's the big thing right there. There was multiple times in that game where he pulled the ball down, took a step, then stopped, and then looked to pass again. And you just can't do that in the NFL. And
so the way this works, just so everybody understands, because somebody's going to, well, you can't call, but somebody's going to write their comment and ask, well, what about Patrick Mahomes? When you leave the pocket, you want to keep your eyes downfield all the time. And when you are an exceptional athlete like Patrick Mahomes or Justin Fields, who may be a better athlete than Patrick Mahomes, while on the run with your eyes downfield, you can attempt to make a throw in stride. But that's not what he's doing. He's coming out of the pocket. He's got his eyes downfield, and then he's stopping to look some more. And that's where these 330-pound tackles are catching him in the open field, and that's what you can't do. The other thing is that the more you watch this tape, you'll see the things that are there early that he's not seeing, the things that are breaking at 2.5 or 3 seconds that he's not seeing. He's not processing information fast enough. And you know what? That is not a negative. That's not a red mark on his balance sheet. That's what happens with guys who've never played this position at this level. And so I still think he's going to be a great quarterback. I just don't like the way they're going about it, because I don't think that this is helping him. They say, oh, this is the only way you can learn. No, this is not the only way you can learn. And if you have enough horrible situations like last week, it starts to get in your head, and now you got to bring the shrinks in. And I don't know anything about that. I don't pretend to be one. But I've heard a lot of commentary this week, guys, about how awful his body language was on the bench all last week. Now, that's not fair. Again, Sean's one of the only ones who gets a good look at it, because you can see it the whole game from the press box when on TV. Those cameras try to find him when he's got that bad body language going on. That's not what's going on, 24/7. But there's so much of it, that this is where you really start to get concerned about these young quarterbacks, Sean.
I'd have bad body language too if I turned the ball over 5 times. I mean, I don't know who wouldn't. Yeah, certainly it wasn't. They show those things on television, and that's not how he's looking every single second that he's on the sideline. But yeah, I mean, it would be weird if your rookie quarterback wasn't having trouble, making these quick decisions. I mean, the NFL game is so fast; it takes some adjustment. It's rare that you have the rookie who's able to do the types of things that Justin Fields is trying to do and do it well. And I mean, I don't know, Hub. Do you think at some point, are you trying to say that maybe he would be better served watching from the sideline?
I think he was best served by what they were doing with
previously
the plan before they made the sudden move to decide he was the starter. What I've tried to be emphatic about, Sean, I thought you were going to ask me this question, and no, I'm not saying go to Andy Dalton. I think once you made the move, now you've put him in this spot. One of the thing we're talking about is, are they ruining him? That's what we're worried about. Now is this doing too much damage? I think you could do even more damage to his psyche by saying, okay, you flunked. You're going back to timeout. We're putting Andy Dalton out there. That was why I never understood why they did what they did it anyway. You got to remember the circumstances of that. Okay. You go to Cleveland and get horribly embarrassed. You come back and you win a game against Detroit where, you expected to beat Detroit, but he looked pretty good. Things got much better. And then you're going to Las Vegas, and you don't know if Dalton is healthy or not, but he's going to dress. And you say, yeah, but he's not quite ready. And so you have another really impressive performance, but really not much that Justin Fields did. Nothing special. The team played very well. And now, Dalton, you think is close to 100%. So there's a couple things they could have done. I would have stayed with the plan. If he was 100%, I would have gone to Dalton and said, Justin did great. He is learning in the Justin Fields package, the plays he gets out there. He's learning on the sideline. Andy Dalton's had 5 quarters. One of his quarters was the best the offense has looked all year, and it's the reason that we beat the number 1 seed in the AFC. You just go back. And the fans that were going to scream, but then we'd have a much better sense of how good or bad this team really is, what this offense can be. Instead, they make this announcement that throws turmoil into the locker room, because there's some veterans who support the veteran, or at least think he's getting a raw deal. Other guys want the kid out there, but now there's all kinds of extra pressure on his shoulders. Now you've got the whole outside noise elevated that much that he's the starter, and he's going to continue to make the same mistakes he's making, not because he's a bad quarterback, because he hasn't had a chance to learn. So I can't get my arms around how, the Monday of that week, Matt was very clear. No, we told you what the plan is. Andy's going to be the starter if he's ready. And then Wednesday morning they come in. Now, the explanation that I got, not the explanation, I should say, what the opinions that I heard from our fellow members of the media was, well, he hadn't had a chance to talk to Dalton yet, hadn't had a chance to talk to all the players yet when he said that on Monday. Probably true. I understand that. But it still doesn't explain why they made the move when they made it, and it may turn out, Kyle, that's a fireable offense, depending on what happens the rest of the way. We have to keep reminding people that, and I keep forgetting it's 17, not 16, but, I mean, there are 10 games to play. There's 11 weeks left. Everything that they set out to accomplish is still in front of them if they can get this thing turned, which seems highly unlikely at this point. But now, you got to do it with Justin Fields. We certainly don't want to see him get hurt, and so I'm sure that's creating a lot of frustration up there right now.
It's creating frustration up at house. Always creating frustration for Bears fans. It's funny though. You say that it seems highly unlikely right now, but we also thought it was highly unlikely coming out of that Cleveland game too, and then they come back and win 2 games. And that's kind of the problem with this Bears team, right? Is they're just kind of stuck in the middle. We talked about it last week. Even after the Tampa Bay game, and I do have more reservations than I did going into that. I still think this is a team that is probably going to be right around 9-8 or 8-9 and playing for a playoff spot in Week 17.
Yeah, I mean, Sean, the only thing I disagree with Kyle on there is that what happened out of the Cleveland game was kind of exactly what I expected to happen. I mean, I didn't think they were going to lose to Detroit, and I'm still not that impressed with Las Vegas, even with what they've done since. I think one of the things we've talked about in this podcast week to week is that even today at 3-4, I think this team almost week in, week out have been pretty much exactly where we expected them to be right now. And I agree with what Kyle just said. They should be able to do more on offense just with how good this running game has gotten, forgetting the issues that you're having with your young quarterback. So, you look at this Sunday, we'll get into that in a few minutes. I don't want to be talking about two things at once, even though we do that a lot here. A couple more questions you want to pop in?
Yeah, we actually got quite a few. So just anyone that has posted a question wondering, we're going to go, I'm sorting through these kind of as offense, and then probably we'll get over to the defense and finish up. There's a couple questions about trade deadline. Sorry, I didn't mean to click that. About trade deadline and coaching change and stuff like that. But so Mike Johnson, I'm not even going to throw this one up, asked about how is David Montgomery doing, any news? And then the question was from Rick, our friend. Hub, I'll let you take this.
Yeah, Rick Gonzalez. Rick checks in pretty much every week, and we really appreciate it, Rick. Again, for any of you who are listening to the podcast and it's not Friday morning at 10, you can join this podcast live. Rick has figured out how to do it. Go to any one of our Twitter accounts for the instruction. You can join via YouTube, via Twitter. And Rick is checking in this morning with Khalil Herbert playing so well. How would you guys handle the carries between Herbert and Montgomery? Sean, I'll let you go first. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, once David Montgomery gets back, which we don't really know the timeline there, you would think based on what what was reported when he was originally injured that it might be within the next couple of weeks. Certainly, David Montgomery is still going to be your number one, but Herbert has really done a nice job since Montgomery went down, and I think he's maybe surprised the Bears a little bit. He's clearly taken over that spot. He was splitting the time with Williams in that Raiders game, and then we saw last week. I know Williams had just come off the COVID list. We don't know if where he was conditioning wise, but it was really the Khalil Herbert show against Tampa Bay, and I certainly wouldn't expect him to be getting the level of touches that he is once Montgomery is back, but I would figure he's still going to be a part of this offense in this run game.
Well, Kyle, it's a high-class problem. I mean, what is the reason that everybody is so impressed with the Cleveland Browns? And I think the obvious answer is Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and nobody criticizes them for wanting to run the ball, 40 times a game. I think that when Montgomery gets back, and I think it'll probably be the Ravens after the bye. The Bears never confirmed this, but the reports were 4 to 5 weeks. That would actually be 5 or 6 weeks. But with the advantage of the bye and the way Herbert is playing, why would you rush him back, versus Pittsburgh when that's probably not going to be the difference in winning or losing the game? Take advantage of the bye, get that thing completely healthy. And when he comes back, I would expect David Montgomery is clearly the starter. He's one of the best backs in the league. And Herbert is clearly number 2. Damian Williams is the odd man out. And now you got to run the ball 35, 40 times a game.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And you went to the exact situation I was going to refer to, which was the Cleveland situation between Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. The other thing I think about with this is one of my philosophies. I think, with a very rare exception for NFL talent at running back, is you don't pay running backs. The lifespan is so short. And I'm one of those guys that believe you should always be taking a running back in the second or third day of the draft, and you're cycling through those guys. And what essentially I learned out of this is, you continue to ride David Montgomery, but when that contract comes up, just let it cycle through. Don't pay your running backs. And this is just, to me, another example. You can find guys to shoulder the load in the NFL.
Yeah, you may be correct. Again, I think David Montgomery has proven that he's an elite back at this point. I mean, people forget that last year, through the whole mess, there was only 3 running backs in the NFL with more yards from scrimmage than David Montgomery. And those 3 guys, by the way, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, and Alvin Kamara. I mean, you think he's in pretty good company with his 1,555 yards of offense and over 1,000 yards rushing last year. So it's not like we've just discovered him this year. He is an elite back in the NFL. So you don't just automatically let him walk. I mean, you look at where the Packers were at just last year. They had Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. Well, they paid Jones and let Williams walk, and here's A.J. Dillon. So I think that the hope is that you find a way to get another deal done with Montgomery. Herbert's under your control for 3 more seasons. And this should be the focal point. And it should make it that much easier for Justin Fields if, in fact, he's the guy and he learns how to run an NFL offense.
I'm not. I guess I should clarify. I'm not just saying you cut Fade automatically, but yeah, if you do find yourself in a situation where you're looking at Dalvin Cook money, I believe he got paid, right? Derrick Henry obviously got a big deal. That's where I start to draw the line. I'm like, I never want to hand out those contracts to running back. The lifespan's too short. You just don't know how quickly those wheels are going to come off. I think there's just better positions to invest your money in the NFL. Pretty much, you're looking at offensive tackle, quarterback, and linebacker or edge rusher is where I want you. Where I think teams need to spend their money.
Yeah, well, and let's make one other point, and we'll take some more questions here. We're talking about 2 games with Khalil Herbert. Okay, I mean, I love the kid. He looks great. He spent 3 years at Kansas and did nothing, before he got to Virginia Tech and had the big season last year.
Barry Sanders might have done nothing at Kansas, but
again, I love the kid. I think they've got something special here. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, okay? I mean, David Montgomery has proven that he's something special. I think that Khalil Herbert might be too. Let's see if they're capable of working out the rotation and what the chemistry is and making this all work, and that they can have this 1-2 mauling attack. But that's probably one of the things that they're holding on for right now, if you think about it. I mean, we'll continue to take questions, but I want to set up something going forward, guys. We talked about the Bears being right where you expected. I'm not going to wait until the end of the podcast. I'm picking the Bears to win Sunday. I mean, this is a must-win situation. I cannot for the life of me understand how the 49ers are coming in here as 4.5 point favorites. That makes no sense whatsoever. They're in worse shape than the Bears. They're 2-4. They're on a 4-game losing streak, and they don't even have some of the potential answers that the Bears have, and they're on the road. So if the Bears lose Sunday, then I think it's over. Then, Kyle, I think we get away from what we expected, and they're not going to be hanging around all year. But I think they probably win. And I think, going into Pittsburgh is a winnable game. I'm not saying I'm not picking that one yet. We'll wait and see. But if that happens, then it's what Kyle just said. Now they're 5-4 going into the bye. You got guys getting healthy coming out. You don't know where you're at. All of that will improve the situation for Justin Fields to grow in. So, that's kind of where they're at as they approach midseason.
I haven't made my decision of who I'm going to pick yet, and I never look at your guys's.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's just because I don't want to have it influence my thoughts. But we have a question in here, and it's a very simple question, and it's the reason why I haven't made my decision yet, because I've been kind of waiting to see if we get news on this. Any news on Mac? Which we don't know about Robert Quinn, we don't know about Khalil Mack, and if the Bears can't rush the passer, I feel a lot worse about their chances of going to having San Francisco come in and the Bears still being able to hold them off.
Yeah, this is Amit Daya, and thank you, Amit, and a 3-word question. I mean, Kyle just gave it to you verbatim. Any news, Mac? No, and the news is that it was a bad report, and I don't want to jump on Ian Rappaport. When you do it this much, you're going to have some bad ones. And now, if he ends up on IR, he'll claim he had it right. But they were not. They want to do everything possible to avoid being forced to be without Mac for 3 weeks. This is a situation where even if they convince themselves it is a 3-week injury, they probably wouldn't IR him because in the hopes that maybe he'd get better a week earlier. Now, that said, as they continue to try to rehab it with these, my fear, guys, and this has not been reported anywhere. This is me surmising based on all these years of NFL experience. I've seen, foot problems like this before. They usually turn out to be Liz Frank's. And if it's a Liz Frank injury, it could haunt him for a year. You just don't know. Now, again, nobody has reported that. I'm not saying that that's what it is, but it's one of these things that is incredibly painful, but they sell you that you're not doing any additional damage, and these guys try and soldier on, and we know what a warrior Mac is. And if that's what they're dealing with, then it's probably not going to be right all year. Then it's probably not a 3-week injury. So we have to just keep our fingers crossed and hope it's not that. And we'll find out later on Friday. Again, we record Friday mornings about Mac's status for Sunday. They may rule him out Sunday. And so that's why the bigger, see, again, I made my pick on an assumption, Kyle. I said, I'm taking the Bears. If they're without Quinn, Hicks, and Mac, then all bets are off.
Yeah.
But I mean, Akeem Hicks has been limited in practice this week, which suggests that he's going to try and go. I keep holding out this hope that Robert Quinn is just getting healthy. And since it's only been a week, this week of practice is nothing, that he could go out there and be Robert Quinn again. And if that's the case, you probably could beat the 49ers without Mac. But if it's no Mac and one or two of the others, then that's a whole different ballgame.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if they get Quinn and Hicks available for this game, then maybe it doesn't hurt as much to let Mac take a week off. And if it's bad enough that they're even considering IR, maybe it is worth giving him 1 week off and just moving week by week here.
Sorry, I don't know if you noticed me smiling during I wasn't smiling at the Liz Frank discussion. I was smiling because I realized it was Molly's mid podcast time to get a drink behind you. That's why I started laughing. But I mean, I thought I was surprised when I saw that Ian Rappaport report about Khalil Mack going on the IR because he is incredibly tough. And as you said, I mean, I'm making an assumption here, but I mean, if this goes off the rails, it's going to be really hard for Matt Nagy to keep his job. And right. Yeah. So they're not between how tough Khalil Mack is and him wanting to play through an injury and the fact that they need him to win games, it would have to be a significant injury for them to put him on IR. They're going to do everything they can to keep him on the field.
And it's not like this is a new injury. I mean, this has been on the injury report for about a month. Khalil Mack with the foot injury.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and Kyle, I think you just touched on something really interesting. If you see Hairless Yoda's question, let's get to that one next because I got to find out exactly what he's talking about. Was
it about Sean Payton?
I'm not sure
okay.
where that. Yeah, it said Peyton, and I didn't know what he meant by that. But I guess I assumed it was Sean Payton. We'll get to Hairless Yoda in a minute. To be clear about something that Kyle just said, because it is absolutely fair and objective and reasonable analysis. The question when you have coaches' jobs in jeopardy becomes, are they pushing players to play hurt? Are they doing things they might not normally do? Are they getting near panic mode and throwing all things to the wind? I have seen nothing yet to suggest that is the case at Hallis Hall. No indications of that whatsoever. But what I did want to say about this is I've gotten to know Khalil Mack at least a little bit in the time that he's been here. And I think that you would have to risk bodily harm from Khalil Mack telling him you're putting him on IR. This is not a case where the coaches out of desperation are going to abuse him and talk to him about playing hurt. I mean,
it might not even be out of desperation or abusing player. I do honestly believe that Matt Nagy is still really well liked in that locker room. And I wouldn't be, I mean, you get into a situation where players are a little bit more willing to play through some pain if they do think that, coach's job is on the line and they still want to play for that coach. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's a great point. I just can tell you in the case of Khalil Mack, my guess is it would take a nuclear bomb to keep him off the field. It's that's just the guy he's proven himself to be. So, can we pop that Hairless Yoda question up?
He's asking about coaching changes.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so he's added another one. There was a question here that said he was unaware of Hub's dislike of Peyton.
Yeah, so someone replied to him in the comments. So he was asking about, could Pace stay? Could Pace stay if he brought in a great coach, say trading for Sean Payton? Yeah,
to whoever gave that response, I don't like Sean Payton personally for some of the things that have happened off the field and some of the things that I know about, his character. And we get to know these guys after many years. I mean, he's been the Saints coach forever. I've been doing this forever. But I will tell you right now, there are a lot of coaches I don't like that I jump through hoops to have here in Chicago. I mean, most people don't like Bill Belichick. I actually know Bill a little bit, and I do like him. But you think I'd say no to Bill Belichick? I wouldn't say no to Sean Payton. He's a great football coach. There's no question about that. So, but I don't think he's leaving New Orleans. No, he's from here. I suppose that may be why we're focused on him. But I just don't think we're at the alternate coach point yet, guys. I mean, there's going to come a point when we get to week 13, week 14, week 15, if it's still looking like this, everybody's going to be writing and talking every day about their wish lists and who it might be. But there's no chance that they're making a change right now. And so I haven't really thought about who the other options might be. We'll get to that, Sean, I think when that becomes relevant and necessary.
Yeah, we'll have to see how this plays out. And certainly, with this game coming up this week, it's you mentioned it earlier, Hub. The Bears are in a must-win mode, and I think the 49ers are sort of in that same mode. So this game's gonna tell us a lot, be a big indicator for both these teams on which direction this season's going.
Kyle, where do you want to take us next, buddy?
I was thinking of, I had seen a question here, I can't find it now, asking about trending head coach candidates in 2022. And, I don't think, going back to Hairless Yoda's question about, I don't think they would trade. I do think there might be a couple veteran head coaches that end up on the market. Pete Carroll, I think his time might be about done in Seattle. Maybe Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh. Like, those would be a couple of veteran names I would think that I think of. But who are trending candidate for NFL head coaches? I'll throw one name out there. I think that this isn't exactly beating outside the bush or beating around the bush. Just throwing different things together there. Eric Bieniemy, obviously, if you want to go back to the Kansas City tree. But that's kind of the name that I is out there a lot and would make a lot of sense to me.
Hold on, Kyle. Mike Tomlin has the best job in professional sports.
Why is that?
Didn't you hear that? Didn't you hear him this week when asked about college jobs?
I did not hear that.
Yeah, I mean, guys, how often does it happen that a currently successful head coach in a job where he still has a chance to win leaves to go to another NFL team, and especially one that has been the mess the Bears have been in recent years and recent times? So you can talk about the Sean Paytons and the Mike Tomlins of the world, but that's not happening. No,
my thought was I think Tomlin is a couple of years ago. I thought Tomlin was kind of on the outs. It sounded like it. You had heard reports of him losing that locker room. Obviously, they had rebounded. Things again are looking a little tough there this year, but I don't really think that's on Tomlin. I think that's more on the decline of Ben Roethlisberger more than anything else.
Oh, it clearly is. And then you even look at the roster. I mean, they had the best offensive line in football for years, and they had to blow it up this offseason. Eventually the cap bites everybody, and the cap bit them. And Tomlin still hasn't back to 500. One thing about the Steelers is that those are jobs for life. I mean, look at Bill Cowher, look at Chuck Noll. They've had 3 coaches in 45 years. So, Tomlin's not in any jeopardy there. Sean Payton is sat down in New Orleans. Pete Carroll, it's funny because Carroll's another guy who I have my struggles with in terms of, character and off the field and who is this guy. But he's a great football coach, and so that's something you would live with. Well, I mean,
he's a great motivator.
Look at his record, though, guys, and beyond that, look at who he wins with. This is what is so stunning to me about the Green Bay Packers is I don't care how they can go 17-0. I'm still going to look at the roster and evaluate the talent and try and figure out how you're doing this. Well, Carroll's done a lot of that too. Now, what do these guys all have in common? Think about everybody you just mentioned, and I'll give you the list. Ben Roethlisberger, Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers. Okay, I mean that's why these are the 4 coaching names that we're talking about.
That's why I saw. You bring up Russell Wilson. That's why I've soured on not Sean Payton. I've always soured on Sean Payton. I'm with you. Not a big fan of that guy. But Pete Carroll, my thing is I've been really annoyed the last couple of years with them because their defense has been terrible, and his answer to that was to try and slow the game down and take the ball out of the hands of Russell Wilson. Essentially, we're going to rely on the run game and try and keep opponents off the field. I'm like, you have Russell Wilson. Throw the damn ball.
I hear you, Kyle. And my response to that with a lot of these guys is I just look at the win-loss record. At the end of the day, I have this long running. It's fun, but Danny Parkins at 670 The Score, who I visit with every week. He thinks Mike McCarthy is the worst guy to ever coach football, and I'm like, Danny, there are 20 guys in NFL history. I think it was 23 guys, that won 100 games coaching or whatever it may be. It wasn't that. There's a couple stats out there that McCarthy ranks with the top 20 coaches of all time. So that doesn't mean that he's one of the top 20 coaches of all time, but you can't be a bad football coach and get there, and so that's where some of this stuff is circumstantial. To the point, guys, listen, the flavors of the month, so to speak, obviously Brian Daboll in Buffalo, everybody's talking about right now. Not young, but Joe Barry, who was not available last night, but who has done a remarkable job with the defensive talent he's got to work with the Packers. People are talking already about Joe Brady in Carolina, which I think is way premature, considering particularly the train wreck he's got with Sam Darnold right now. So I can rattle off all the hot young names for you. But it doesn't do any good until we figure out the circumstance that they're walking into. And so I just think it's silly right now to be talking about, who could be the next. If you're a real Bears fan, you're hoping that it's Matt Nagy. You're hoping that they get this turned around, and that they give you a great season with the possibilities that are left. And then once that is no longer feasible, you move on to, who should be next.
Yeah, you can sell that to people. I'm not sure they're buying it at this point.
Kyle, I'm not even selling it. I know what's going on out there.
I immediately, you said if you're a real Bears fan, you should be rooting for Matt Nagy, and I expected to see some fire coming into the chat immediately. And I don't know what you're saying. It's just there's so much anger at this point. It's just you get to a point where it's that snowball or that train has left the station, I guess.
The mystery to me, guys, is, and again, I do this with records. I do this with wins and losses because that's how you're supposed to be graded in the NFL. And Matt Nagy's record is not in the lower half of NFL coaches' records over the last 3.5 years that he's been here. As a matter of fact, it's closer to the top, and I understand that doesn't mean that you don't need change. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't make change, but all the that's a word I can't even think, that the hate, it feels so wrong from Bears fans who don't understand that under Matt Nagy, they've won more games than they have since going back to Lovey. And even at the end of Lovey's career, they weren't winning, as much. So it's not as bad as it gets painted to be, I guess, is all I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, it's 2018 is a long time ago, though. I don't, any fan that wants change, I think they're correct. They should want change if the Bears continue on this trend and they're either not making the playoffs or finishing 8-9 and then losing the first round again. But I think this is a good spot here as we get near an hour. I know you guys got to get running. Well, you don't have to run to Hallis Hall today, do you? Everything's online, isn't it?
We're virtual today.
You're virtual today, but still, we're here a few days from the trade deadline. I got to find the question here. Amit had asked another question. Will Bears sell? Will the Bears be sellers at the trade deadline? Is what he was asking.
It's Amit Daya is back with another question, and Amit, thank you, because I like the 5 and 3 word questions. It definitely makes it easier in this format. 6 words, forgive me. I think we're going to have a better idea Sunday.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to this week. Yeah.
Again, you have not just a head coach, you have an organization focused on saving their jobs. Now, we don't know what is going on behind closed doors at Hallis Hall. For all we know, they've already been guaranteed next year. I doubt that seriously. I'm just saying it's a possibility. For all we know, the decision's already been made and there's nothing they can do to save their jobs. The truth is obviously somewhere in between. But it's not just Matt Nagy. It's Ryan Pace. It's Matt Nagy. Maybe it's even Ted Phillips, and it certainly should be. The only guy whose job is safe is George McCaskey's. And so with all the noise, everybody hears it. You worry that some of these decisions are being made just from outside pressure, from all the fan volatility. And so Sunday, you go out You beat the 49ers. You're impressive doing it. Now you're set up for a Monday night on national TV against Pittsburgh. And you know, if you win that one, you're now a wild card favorite, you know, going into the bye at the halfway point of the season. So, you know, if they lose Sunday, then who you kidding? You know, if you lose Sunday, even if you go win at Pittsburgh, you're still a sub 500 team. And so I just think if they win Sunday, they're probably not going to be sellers. If they lose, they just might be.
Yeah, and I think sellers is always the wrong word in the NFL too. It's you know, I think that implies kind of like the baseball type talk of, you know, burning it down. That's not going to happen. You know, you could see if they lose and they do decide to try and move some pieces. One, it's going to depend on what teams are willing to give up. I don't think the Bears are just going to give players away to give them away for a 6th or 7th rounder. You know, if a team is willing to come up and give the Bears what 3rd or 4th rounder for Allen Robinson, guys that have expiring contracts, you could see that. Outside of that, I mean, like veterans they have really locked up, like Khalil Mack, for instance, just pulling a name, who's under contract for still multiple years, unless someone does something silly. Like I don't see them moving those type of guys. There could be small moves. Brian Rasta in the chat, I didn't get that question. Asked about Andy Dalton specifically because Dak Prescott apparently has been downgraded and may miss this week. If like someone like Dallas would have interest in Andy Dalton. Yeah, I think one of those backup quarterbacks could go. I wouldn't expect wholesale changes though at the trade deadline, even with the loss this week.
Sean?
Yeah, no, I sellers is not the right word for the NFL. It's certainly not like you know, we're not going to see what the Cubs did in on July 31st, but certainly if they lose this game, they should be listening to offers. And yeah, Kyle, you hit on it. You know, some of those guys with expiring contracts, Allen Robinson, Akeem Hicks, even. You know, they should at least hear what's out there and what's available. I don't necessarily know, you know, what the right price is for them on those guys, but you know, I'm in agreement too that, you know, you don't need Andy Dalton and Nick Foles sitting on your bench. You might as well unload one of them if the right offer comes about.
Here's the problem, guys, is that and people, we can preach it, but they hear it and ignore it, or they just don't want to hear it. The trade deadline in the NFL is unlike the trade deadline in any other sport, and not even in the same area code as Major League Baseball. Look at what the Chicago Cubs just did. They had 3 veteran stars on expiring contracts, and they got the equivalent of multiple first-round draft choices for each of them, okay? In the NFL, you've got Allen Robinson on that expiring contract. If you got a 4th-round pick, that would be considered great value. You know, you might struggle to get a 5th because of the situation. And so now, with which I think wide receiver may be this team's greatest need right now, because you think maybe some of these young offensive tackles are going to emerge. Now, you not only don't have Robinson, and you've got one of the weakest receiver cores in the league where you're trying to develop Justin Fields the rest of the year, regardless of what's going on. And all you got was a 4th-round pick. Are you going to replace a number 1 receiver with that? Take a look at Akeem Hicks, okay? You've got more depth there. You could probably get away with it. But Akeem Hicks has been one of the 3 or 4 most dominant interior defensive linemen in football. You might get a 5th or a 6th. And so, yeah, maybe you do it. You know, if you think you're getting ready for a teardown, then that's fine. But what's going to happen Sunday that's going to move you from contending for the playoffs to a teardown?
Yeah, the Bears aren't going to a teardown after this season. Even if they have a coaching change, there's too many pieces in place for them to completely tear this down. You know what? And talking about, like I said, it's not traditional seller. I wouldn't mind if the Bears, and quote unquote, would be a buyer. You know, if a player came available, which teams do occasionally do stupid things. I'm thinking of Jacksonville over the year where they make a young quality player available that is going to be under contract for a few years, and you usually get them for cheaper than you should. You know, I don't even know who that name might be. You never quite know until you get there. But like, I wouldn't even hate if the Bears were able to acquire a player that could be around for the next several years.
Yeah, the only thing that bothers me about that is that I just wrote a couple of weeks ago, they have basically no draft picks,
Yeah.
As a result of the Justin Fields trade. It's not a complaint. I like the Justin Fields trade, but now you're back to nothing to work with next year already, and now you're going to give up another pick. Now, again, based on what we just said, it's probably only a 6th or a 5th or something like that, but it's still a problem.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go into like a second, and I'm just throwing this against the wall. I'm just saying, like, if you have a situation where like a Jalen, you don't need a quarterback, but I'm talking about a player like Jalen Ramsey. All of a sudden, like, they want to offload Jalen Ramsey for whatever reason. Like, yeah, I think you at least pick up the phone and listen, right? That's what I'm talking about. That type of situation.
There's no question about that. Of course, if we look back though, that now you are talking about a couple of number ones that the Bears don't have.
That was probably. I'm just saying a high quality player.
All right, guys, there is an unwritten rule that when you get to an hour in a podcast, you've definitely gone too long. Although we do know that you can listen to this in segments if you want, since it's downloaded on wherever you have placed it to listen to. So we're going to have to say goodbye this week. But before we do, I mean, I've already said it, guys. There are some unknowns here as we do this, and the injuries are a huge issue. But I just see the Bears backed into a corner, angry with some assets. I see the way the 49ers are playing. If anybody watched that game last week against Indianapolis, the Colts pounded them, and the Colts offense isn't that different than the Bears right now, although Carson Wentz is playing very well. But I mean, it's all ground-based. And so I just think the Bears are going to win this one. They may even be somewhat impressive doing it. Sean, what do you think happens Sunday?
I'm taking the 49ers. I'm at the point where I'm saying Bears, prove it to me that you can play some offense here and that you can throw the ball a little bit.
Well, Kyle, I know that you said that you hadn't made up your mind yet and you hadn't looked at anybody else. I always do peek just because I'm curious, so I can tell you what everybody else did, but maybe you don't want to know. Go ahead and tell us what you think.
I mean, I'm going to hedge here. If 2 of Mac, Hicks, and Quinn play, the Bears win. If 2 of the 3 miss, I'm going to say that the Bears lose this game.
Well, it's not a hedge because I think you're right. But now that you've done it, Kyle, I can tell you and I are the only ones who even think that. So that's, everybody else is a little upset about last Sunday, I guess, or certainly at least concerned about the possibility of a repeat. So if nothing else, it will be interesting. We know that. It will be Halloween. Hopefully nothing spooky happens at Soldier Field Sunday at noon. It is a noon kick, I think, isn't it? I haven't even looked at that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it's a noon kick.
Yeah.
Get it done and out of the way.
We really appreciate all of you joining us every week. Tell your friends that they can join it live as well if they have not. If you prefer just listen to it as a podcast, that's great too. We just appreciate you tuning in and giving us a chance to kind of vent. This is therapy for us. It's I don't know about Sean and Kyle, but I can't afford a shrink, so I come here and I let you guys shrink me. But if nothing else, the Bears provoke conversation. And so we will see what we're talking about next week. We hope you will be back with us for another edition of our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider podcast. For now, have a great weekend, everybody. And let's hope it's a little more pleasant situation around your favorite team next week.